Good day, everyone. My name is Brian Prophet with the Open Source Program Office, welcoming you to another edition of Community Central. Before I introduce today's guest, the usual housekeeping notes. If you have any questions for our panel about the Open organization and the work that they're doing, please feel free to use the Q&A tool within BlueJeans so we can get all your questions in and get them ranked in order of popularity. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's panel moderator. I'm very pleased to welcome Brian Berenshausen, a recent addition to the Open Source Program Office. We're very excited to have him on board and have him here today to talk about the Open organization. Brian, good morning.
Good morning and time zone appropriate greetings, everybody. Thanks a lot, Brian, and thanks so much for having us and giving us this opportunity to talk about the open organization community and the great work that everyone's been doing. I want to take a moment to just introduce the panelists, or rather let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Allison Matlack. Allison, if you want to give us a brief hi.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Matlack, and I lead the communications team for the Products and Technologies division within Red Hat.
Rebecca Fernandez.
Hey, everybody. As Brian said, my name is Rebecca, and I manage our program around open organization culture here at Red Hat. So thinking about how we help people thrive in an open culture, how we scale that open culture as Red Hat grows, and how we share that with the world.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. And Laura, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Hilliker. I've been an open.org community member for almost 5 years now, and I am a conceptual architect, strategist, idea maker, and I'm here to talk a little bit about Greenpeace International and, of course, the We Are Open Co-op.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. We'll dive right in to talk about the open organization community. Now, the open organization community and our project is an upstream knowledge sharing community committed to exploring how open principles change the way we work, manage, and lead. We're going to talk about that. It's a short statement that means a lot. We're going to talk a lot about it in the rest of our presentation here today. Hopefully you've seen our work, but if you haven't, don't fret, because throughout the presentation you'll learn what this statement means to us, what our community does, what kinds of contributions we love, what sorts of contributors are attracted to our work, what kinds of things we've done in the past, what we want to do in the future, and then most importantly, what you can do to join the community and contribute to our project. Just a little bit about the community and our makeup. According to a survey we did of our folks engaging with our materials last year, we found that folks identified themselves in a number of different ways, right? We had folks who identified themselves as IT architects and developers, which didn't surprise us too much because we do talk about technical topics in the community, but other folks identified themselves as, for example, project managers, coaches or consultants, and people managers. And that didn't surprise us really either, and that's because our community really attracts folks who are interested in the people and process side of open. Interested in the ways that open principles, or principles that are derived from open source software movements but are not necessarily limited to them, are impacting organizational culture and design. And so folks like project managers, coaches and consultants, people managers, we even had some folks who identified as presidents or CEOs interested in our work and our materials because they're interested in the ways that open principles in a non-technical way are impacting their organizations. At the core of our community and our core group of community contributors is the Open Organization Ambassador, or Ambassador Group. And the speakers today on our panel are all Open Organization Ambassadors. They are a group dedicated to teaching others about the ways open source principles can enhance and ultimately reshape organizational cultures. And they are writers. They discuss and evangelize organizational cultures predicated on transparency, adaptability, collaboration, inclusivity, and community. And those keywords are going to be really important as we move forward and we talk a little bit about how this group defines open organizations. We come from all walks in this community, and as you can see, the contribution, the way that contributors see themselves varies, but we're all united around this single question, which is how do open principles change the ways we work, manage, and lead? This question is the one that galvanizes us and pulls us all together. I want to give just a brief history before I turn it over to our panelists so folks know a little bit more about our community and where it has come from. In June of 2015, Red Hat President and CEO Jim Whitehurst wrote a book called The Open Organization. And that book is really about his experience joining Red Hat and trying to understand its culture, right? Red Hat's organizational culture is predicated on open source principles, and those principles infuse so much of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it at Red Hat. And the book is really about Jim's learning how to understand that culture and understand how open principles played a role in transforming how he thinks about organizational life and management and leadership, and how those principles transform those matters for others too around the world. And of course, at the end, he says this book that explores the way that open principles have changed not only how I think of management and leadership and organizational design, but how other leaders can as well. This book is just the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. And openness, while it is central to Red Hat, is of course not limited to Red Hat. It's broader than one organization, one company, one vertical, one industry, what have you. And so I invite you, he says on page 193 of the book, to share your thoughts on opinions with us on how we can all lead and work better in the future. And I always think of this line, this is sort of the sentence that launched 1,000 ships. Maybe the sentence that launched 500 blog posts or so. We'll get to that in a minute. But this was an invitation to continue the conversation that began with one book. And that conversation continues today. That conversation has been lively, robust, and illuminating for the last 5 years. And so much so, in fact, that book sparked an entire community dedicated to exploring and expanding on the insights that come from the open organization. That community has then been able to take one book by one author about one company in one industry, i.e. the open organization by Jim Whitehurst, principally about Red Hat and about the software industry, and expanded that book and that conversation to include dozens of authors from many different industries, from all different geographies in regions around the globe, to discuss how open principles are impacting all of them. And they've transformed that singular book into an entire book series, among other things, right? It includes a field guide and a leader's manual and a workbook and some guides for industry-specific readers, right? So folks who are interested in IT culture change or education, really exploring the way those principles are impacting organizations and teams of all kinds in all different regions and in all different industries. So there are many ways to get involved with the community and contribute your own knowledge to what we're doing. And I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca to talk a little bit about how you can get started and what kinds of contributions you can make right away.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so no matter what organization you're a part of, there are opportunities to get involved. I think the easiest thing to do is to go visit opensource.com/openorganization/start, as you see the URL up there. You can also check out our GitHub repository and see some of the things we're doing and potentially even some open issues that we'd love your help with. And we have a mailing list. See the email address up there. So if you're not sure kind of even where to begin, that's a really good place to check. And as far as what kinds of contributions you could make, there's so many opportunities. We have a lot of resources that have been created. For example, those books that Brian mentioned, but also many other things that we'll share with you in just a moment. And being able to translate or localize one of those could be a nice thing. It could be something that you can, if English is not your native language and you're wanting to communicate about these kinds of things to people in your world, being able to do that in a language that is people's native language is a great opportunity. So it can be kind of a win-win for you and the community. You could collect a new case study for us, talk about how openness is happening inside of your organization. You could write about your own techniques or best practices. So what are the things that's working well for you? You can also submit corrections to a book because we're human, and even with as many eyes as we have on these things, we still occasionally find our own typos or errors in there. So certainly patches cheerfully accepted on that front. And maybe you have an idea for our next book, a new book chapter, a new edition, anything like that, some tool that you've been tinkering with that you think others could contribute to and make better as well. I can tell you pretty much any idea that you bring to the community and to Brian and others, people normally are like, yes, let me help you. Let's figure out how to make it happen. So you'll see just a few examples of stories about that in just a moment.
Great. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Yeah, and just to echo Rebecca's sentiment there, one of the things I love about our community is its willingness to welcome new members and to facilitate new contributions. And we're going to talk now about some of the ways that we have built on contributions from members over the years, some of the things that we do as a knowledge sharing community, and the ways that we are able to generate artifacts that further our mission to explore the ways that open principles change the way we work, manage, and lead. One of the things I definitely need to mention is our archive of articles, case studies, best practices, guides, tutorials on opensource.com. And so you can check out more than 500 articles that we've published since 2015 that talk about openness across industries, across geographies, etc. It's a great archive and repository of material. I would love to be able to talk about all 500 different articles, but we would be here for several days, if not several weeks. They're all very precious to us as we've seen them come to life, but we only have time to really delve into a few. So I thought I would invite one of our highest profile storytellers to the chat today to tell us her story. But I did want to mention quickly that we have collected case studies and best practices from a number of organizations, including Buffer, Greenpeace, as you'll hear in a moment, Lightbend, and also some organizations that are outside sort of the digital technology space or the software space, right? Thinking about Code for America or universities or a telco or a concrete manufacturing company, right? Understanding the way that open principles impact organizational culture and design in a really kind of industry agnostic way. So if you're interested in these stories and these case studies, please check us out there on opensource.com. Again, I'd love to be able to tell you about all these stories, but I did want to invite Laura Hilliker, whose story is very special to all of us in the open organization community, to talk a little bit about her participation in the community and how that has influenced her work with nonprofit Greenpeace. So I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Brian. I got involved in the open organization community before I started working with Greenpeace. I spent 5 years working with the Mozilla Foundation, and at Mozilla, I really, learned about open source, and I also learned about open communities. And some of the things that I was thinking about in 2015 when I found the open organization community was how do we take all of the great stuff about open source and help other organizations with it? How do we do something in the social justice world, in the environmental world, specifically nonprofits? I was really interested in helping nonprofits to benefit from things we know from open source. And then I got an opportunity to work with Greenpeace, who started engaging me because of my curiosity and interest in open source, and also because of my open source background. And so I started with Greenpeace and the open org community just about at the same time. And over the last 5 years, I have really enjoyed being part of the open org community, because bringing openness to a group of people who maybe don't understand what that means, how it works, what's different about it, is a very challenging thing to do. And the open org community is a bunch of people who really care about the principles and the work, and showed a lot of compassion and solidarity for the work I was doing, trying to bring open to Greenpeace. Now, in 5 years, I've had a lot of successes. I'm very proud to say that a lot of my colleagues at Greenpeace have embraced the open source way and open principles, and are working every day to make their programs and their projects more community-oriented, more transparent, more adaptable, more agile, all of the things we love about open source. I helped Greenpeace International decide to use open licensing for all future content on greenpeace.org, which felt like a massive win. And all in all, the work that I've been doing at Greenpeace has really been it's really been based on the themes that we talk about in the open org community. I'm also very proud to say that Greenpeace and Red Hat are starting a collaboration, a partnership. Because of my participation in this community, I had access to passionate Red Hatters who want to make the world a better place. And we are starting to figure out how Red Hat and Greenpeace can collaborate to do things together, specifically around the platform, the open project and platform that I helped establish at Greenpeace. It's called Planet 4. And if you haven't heard of it yet, there's a whole series on opensource.com about the work that we're doing, the work that we've started, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it in the coming year. I will pass it back.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks so much, Laura. Yep, and Laura's going to hang out and talk about her experience as we take audience questions and talk more about our community involvement in different projects. We have some other examples too, some of the artifacts that we've created and maintained as part of our community. So I wanted to toss it over to Allison to explain some of the cool stuff that we've done and its history, and then also talk about how you can get involved to help improve it.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So after the book was published, The Open Organization, Jim Whitehurst said the #1 question that he was asked by leaders from other organizations was, how do I make my company more open? Except that, as Jim has said, the Open Organization book is not a primer or a how-to guide, but rather it's a story of how one organization looks on its best day. So the Open Organization community gathered to help address this gap of how exactly does one define an open organization, and what characteristics do we see in communities and organizations at various levels of maturity? So while every organization is different, and so every example of an open organization is unique, the Open Organization ambassadors came together and clarified that there are really 5 core characteristics that serve as the basic conditions for openness in most of those contexts. And Brian mentioned them earlier. They are transparency, inclusivity, adaptability, collaboration, and community. And there's a link here where you can get a paperback copy, or you see the little tiny one there is on GitHub. So for each of these characteristics, you can move forward, Brian, that we as a community defined 5 levels of maturity. And this maturity model can help organizations understand where they are and define real actionable steps to take to become more open. And you can see in the very tiny print here an example of transparency, which is an essential characteristic of any open organization. This is also available, like everything, for pull requests on GitHub. And to make it even easier, we created a 1-page resource that summarizes that maturity model. And this is a really quick and easy way to see at a very high level where your organization falls and what needs to happen to shift to more open. So if we stick with the example of transparency, if you find your organization is making decisions and then asking for feedback on how things went, kind of define that as level 1, which is initial. And you can try opening up the decision-making materials earlier in the process and gathering that feedback before decisions are final. And we call that a step up to level 2 as defined. This is a really great resource that you can use for your open organization. And again, pull requests welcome. And there's one other example of how people in other communities have been building on top of these materials in our ecosystem. A group within Red Hat created an online open organization capability model assessment that was built on top of the open organization maturity model. So we've got a link to this here too, which we'll share with the slides.
Great. Thanks so much, Allison. That's a great overview. And so in closing here, I'll just talk a little bit about ways that you can join up and how we'd love to have your contributions to this conversation, this ongoing conversation about openness in organizations around the world. I just want to say this is a really exciting time to join the open organization community and to make a contribution. And your ability to make an impact is great right now. As you've seen, we've sort of moved from a book to an entire community. And that community is continuing to evolve. And we're soon going to launch a new look and feel, a new brand, a new platform, one that is even more open than it is now and allows for different kinds of contributions and different kinds of stories to be told. As you can see, the logo we use to represent our community right now still ties us visually to the original book that came out in 2015, which, while we like it, as you can see, and I hope we've been able to impress on you through the rest of these slides and through our conversation here, this conversation, of course, is bigger than any one person or any one book. And so we're going to develop new materials under a new look and feel that allow us to demonstrate that fact. So it's a great time to join the community. It's an excellent time to be a part of what we're doing, and we welcome you. There are many different ways to get involved. You can visit the openorganization.org. That points to our archive of materials at the moment, but will soon point to our new website. We've got a community mailing list that is accessible to you. And as many of our speakers have already said, we welcome you on GitHub looking at our materials there. Our books are all open source, Creative Commons licensed, and available for review and modification. And our definition and maturity model are also, we always welcome pull requests on those as well. And of course, we're on Twitter at openorg-book. So that's all we have, but we'd love to take your questions. So I think I'll toss it back over to Brian.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. We certainly appreciate your time and the panel's time, and we have a number of questions that have come up. So the first one is from Ben, who asked, are there any thoughts about launching an open org guide for cybersecurity?
That's great. I never thought of that topic before. I don't know enough about cybersecurity to know if there would be enough writing or material there to make that work, but I would certainly be open to that idea and would love to talk to Ben about it. Anybody else have any knowledge on that topic?
Certainly not an expert, but I think that's something our community might want to dig into, because the InfoSec community is really lively, and I'm sure there are a lot of great opinions about it. And it's probably, and again, coming from just a very high level understanding, probably a little bit more complicated, just because with security and processes and everything like that, it tends to be more rigid processes, just from my understanding. But I'd really interested to work through what it looks like, what openness looks like in that context.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure that we have ever had somebody come forward with a topic that we didn't end up finding there was a lot more to say about it than we imagined initially. So bring it forward and let's see.
That's right. I will reference, Ben, to the Open Organization Guide for Educators, in which two educators who run a cybersecurity course wrote about how they do that the open source way, according to open principles. And so in the Open Organization Guide for Educators, you can read more about their cybersecurity course and the way that they've opened it up using not only open source tools, but open principles to drive how their students work. And it's a really inspiring chapter. In fact, that got some media and press coverage when the book launched because people were really inspired by that chapter. So I would say, Ben, check that out, get started there, see what you like and don't like about what's there and what's not there, and reach out. Maybe we can develop more materials.
I would also say, Ben, that if you want to reach out to me directly, as well as Jen Kelchner, who used to be as a former Open Org ambassador, we did some future world visioning around the theme of cybersecurity for the public sector late last year, and probably have some resources that you can access.
Okay, thank you, panelists. So our next question is from Carrie, who says that she has used the tool of Matrix Sheet as well as her teams have also used it. She would like to share her experience with those tools. So who would be the best person for her to talk to?
Anybody on this panel would be happy to hear your story, Carrie, and learn more about what worked and didn't work. But one of the best things to do is probably connect with us on GitHub, where the maturity model is listed, so that everybody can benefit from your story, read it, and your feedback's logged in a public place, so we can all use your feedback to improve the tool. That's what I would say. I don't know if panelists have other opinions.
I would also say that if you are eager to write your story up as a narrative, it would be a great post for the Open Org community on opensource.com.
Okay, great. So Jason has our next question. As an open source content community, what advice would you have for advancing community-driven content throughout an organization?
Brian.
Advancing community-driven content throughout an organization. Interesting question. I hope I'm understanding it correctly. But I think the question is, how can you continue to be an advocate for your community's materials outside the community, right? And so we have found in the open organization community the importance of repeat, timely, and some might say over communication, right? So making sure that folks are understanding what our community is doing, when they're doing it, and why. But let me think on that and give our panelists a chance to jump in, then I'll come back.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing I've observed that this community has been pretty successful at is really trying to understand who is interested in the content and getting it in front of those people. So rather than doing like a broad blast of everything to everybody, really looking at kind of who are the parts of the organization that might be most interested in this particular topic and doing some outreach there. I've seen a lot of success from that inside Red Hat for sure.
And one other thing I think I would add to that too is that what I've seen is that because folks are not that join, especially our community, are not necessarily immediately drinking the openness Kool-Aid or the open source Kool-Aid, or they're not technical in nature, so they don't really even have a background necessarily in open source software or licensing or things. They just know that this thing called openness seems to be an answer to a problem. They have organizational challenges, they have organizational issues, and they've heard stories about the way that openness might help them solve that problem. So one of the ways we found success connecting people to our materials is by foregrounding the problem, right? And really stressing openness not as an end in itself, but openness as a manner, a style, or way to address an organizational issue. And once you foreground the problem, we found that we were able to attract more contributors because now they're contributing not just to a project about openness for openness' sake, but to a project and to a knowledge base that is solving real-world problems for people.
Great, thank you. So Leonardo asks, how can we promote the open organization work being done at Greenpeace with other NGOs we are working with, or have contact with besides sharing marketing materials and social networks and so forth? Who should we talk to about getting Red Hat involved with an NGO, and what are the terms of this involvement?
I guess I'll start. There's a lot in that question. So yeah. I would say that it's not something that we have a whole lot of like stuff on the shelf that you can just pull off and get started with. I know Laura, her Greenpeace's engagement with Red Hat just grew over time. So I can give the example of that particular one, and Laura can probably fill in more details there. But that one started out with, back in 2015. Red Hat, through my group, had published the Open Decision Framework out on GitHub and had shared, here are our internal best practices for making decisions. And so when Laura was starting down the path of trying to kind of launch this big open project at Greenpeace, she was able to fork that resource, make it something that was relevant and used Greenpeace appropriate language, and really translate open principles into how are we going to do this in this real world project. And so she actually then contributed a lot of that stuff right back upstream and published her version on GitHub. And that was really, I think, the part of the genesis for the collaboration, along with, of course, her engagement in the Open Org ambassadors community as a whole. So that was one piece. And then over time, as other groups within Red Hat started to kind of meet Laura at different conferences and things, they started to figure out, okay, what does a path forward look like? And so the Red Hat Open Innovation Labs team got involved, and I think they did some kind of residency or project. I'll let Laura speak to details there. But our offerings in the culture space as a company have started to grow in the last couple of years. So I would say definitely take a look at what the Red Hat Open Innovation Labs team can offer today, because there's a lot of different things, from some basic kind of cultural DevOps training. It's like a 1 week kind of thing that might be helpful for a group that's just trying to get started and is looking for something, to an on-site residency where we're working together hand in hand, to like a full-on open transformation. And all this is pretty early still for us. Some of those offerings are more mature than others. But it isn't necessarily, if you have an organization who's looking to buy something and looking to try to bring it to life, Red Hat does offer some stuff in that space. However, we also have, as an open org community, we have a huge number of resources that are out there and available that you can point people to for free. And so it really just depends on kind of where somebody's at and what they're looking to do, to understand sort of, is it Red Hat who can help them? Is it the open org community who can help them? Is it a little bit of both? But in general, I would say maybe start with the free stuff and talk to the ambassadors to see what else is out there. Laura, what would you add? I know it's a little bit murky sometimes to figure these things out.
Yeah, no, I think that you explained it quite well. One correction, it was not the Open Innovation Labs, but rather the Dev Center for Excellence out of Waterford, Ireland, who donated some time to Greenpeace in May of last year. And then the EMEA team invited invited me to speak at the Tech Exchange in September, and we did a hackathon for Greenpeace. So those are the two pieces that have come together so far. But the way that it came about was really, I was sitting on a panel at Summit, and I saw that somebody at Red Hat had another panel talking about a project that happened between Red Hat and UNICEF. And it was the only other nonprofit that I saw at Summit. And I was wearing my open org hat, but I was also wearing my Greenpeace hat. And so I went there and I talked to Alexandra Mercado, who is really a champion of social innovation from the Red Hat side. And I don't know what she did, but over the course of a year and a half, we were able to pull the two organizations together. And earlier when I said it's really just beginning, it's because we've had quite light touch between people at Greenpeace and people at Red Hat, other than me and Alexandra. But we're starting to find more ways to kind of form a matrix of relationships so that we can work together and collaborate together in the future.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I was conflating Greenpeace and UNICEF in my mind there. But Alexandra, who you mentioned, is a really great resource to talk about, because she will be probably very aware of anything else that's in the works. Like most things at Red Hat, it's a little fuzzy kind of who's doing what, and everybody's kind of carving out extra time to figure these things out until they become something we can support more broadly. But and it's probably the same within the open organization community. It's just kind of whoever's interested and willing steps up, and then at some point maybe we turn it into something more official and bigger.
We do it the open source way. We just reach out, say hello, and keep talking about the things we're passionate about until we find somebody else who's also passionate about it.
Okay, great, thank you. So our next question comes from Jana. Is the open org community a good place to point customers to who want to know what all this fuss about open source is?
Well, I want to say it's a great place to point anybody to who wants to know more about what this fuss about openness is. It doesn't matter who they're a customer of or if they're a customer of anybody. I just think that our community is doing a great job of discussing the ways that openness can transform your organization, no matter what your mission or vision or goals are, or what your history is, your size, your industry, your geo. I would say anybody interested in understanding the way that open principles impact organizational culture and design is going to be interested in the stuff that we do. Other speakers might have tips as well.
Yep, I was going to put one plug that I know Jana is a Red Hatter. If you are somebody who is working with Red Hat customers and you're interested in resources, we do have something internal called Sharing Our Open Organization. You'll find it on Mojo. And that has links to things like the open org community and resources that you can connect customers to, but it also has a lot of information about how do you talk to customers about kind of what does an open culture at Red Hat look like, and then how might that be similar or different to what it would look like in their organization. So there's kind of two sets of resources there you can look at, the open org community stuff and also some of the stuff designed for Red Hatters specifically.
Yeah, thanks for that distinction, Rebecca. That's really great. The open organization community is an upstream community that is focused on generating resources that are, among a broad conversation globally, right? I think this person might be asking about Red Hat specific resources for talking about our open organization, which is of course Rebecca's province. But the two projects are different.
And Rebecca also mentioned some other resources in the Greenpeace response, which is the Open Innovation Labs and some other ways that we have to enable customers. So I'm sure you can get plugged into all of that through the Sharing Our Open Organization resources.
Okay, we have one final question from Shabnor. Actually aimed towards Allison, but anybody else can jump in. So they ask, we at the Open Innovation Labs are keen to bring a scientifically validated culture assessment to our customers as part of open leadership enablement maturity model. Open Innovate looks like a good place to start. The question is the tool tested and validated yet?
Well, I actually think Brian might be better to speak to this one. So we've done, I know Jen Kelchner, who Rebecca mentioned earlier, who OpenOrg Ambassador Emeritus, or however we are retiring ourselves as honorary members, has done a lot of work with this too. And how do we validate this with other organizations? So I personally have not done any kind of scientific research or experiments around these. This has been a community effort based on, the experience and expertise of many people across many organizations from many different fields. Obviously, if you find it's something you'd like to add to, correct, make suggestions, GitHub is the place to connect with us. Brian, I don't know if you have more information also about the online capability model, because I believe that came through Open Innovation.
Yeah, I can offer a little bit. I would want to follow up with Shabnor later to understand specifically the phrase scientifically validated, because I think that can mean a lot to different people. The way the maturity model came together is that the Open Organization Ambassadors, of course, being out distributed around the world collecting stories and case studies, started to see some commonalities among organizations and teams working openly at different stages of maturity, right? And they got together and kind of pooled their knowledge to write a general guide that doesn't speak to any specific organization, but that articulates a couple of common characteristics of organizations at each of those levels of maturity. And that was, of course, an extension of the definition as Allison described it later. And then, of course, we were able to operationalize that into some different tools. But as far as testing is concerned, we're still always looking for people to take the tools out in the world and use them and see how they resonate, right? I personally am less interested in scientific validation than I am people's success using the tools to have great conversations in their organizations about where they are and what they can do to be better, right? If a tool that if I am able to offer allows people to have open, frank, and candid conversations in their organization about how they can work more openly to achieve their goals and tackle challenges, then I'm satisfied. And we've had some great anecdotal evidence of people using the maturity model, for example, and Allison's one-sheeter is probably one of our most popular resources, using the model to track where their teams are. And then it leads to great conversations about what they want to work on next quarter, next year, whatever it might be. And so I would want to ask more about the scientific validation part of that question, because I'm not quite sure how one would do that. I'm sure there's sociological models we could leverage to do so. But what we're concerned with is making sure that the tools are compelling enough to facilitate conversations among teams so they can make progress on their goals.
I would add as well that I think each person who has joined the open organization community has brought their own unique background and skills and knowledge. So, if we have some folks out there who have a lot of experience in organizational transformation and diagnostics and validation of tooling and things like that, I think people have kind of latched onto the maturity model and started to apply it as best as they can. But certainly, to my knowledge, we don't have anybody currently in the community who has that kind of background specifically. So if that's you and you're listening, or you can find us people like that who are interested in trying to build this into something more advanced and test it, by all means, the doors are wide open. Come on in and we'll figure it out. I know Jen Kelchner, as mentioned, did do some work in that space, but her background, as far as I'm aware, is not in like deeply validating an assessment so much as figuring out how to apply it. So if you know somebody, please, or you are that somebody, we would love you to come on over and help out.
Excellent. Well, that wraps up all of our questions that we had from our participants today. We certainly thank everyone for jumping in with a lot of great questions and comments about the Open organization. I would like to thank our guests, Brian Berenshausen, Laura Hilliker, Allison Matlack, and Rebecca Fernandez for joining us today on Community Central. All of you, thank you so much for taking time and sharing about this great organization.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really a pleasure to be here. Thanks to our community members for all turning up. Really great to have the conversation.
Right. And before I close some program notes, we have some news about Community Central. There is going to be an extended broadcast series of sessions around technical demos, a lot more community sessions that will be posted within Red Hat and actually out on YouTube, and they will be more of a public nature around the open source community. So the schedule is in the chat. It will appear on the video pages on the various platforms where this video will appear. And we welcome everybody to take a look at that schedule and check out what's coming with future Community Centrals. There's going to be a lot of great content. Until that time, thank you all so much, very much, for coming and joining us on another edition of Community Central. Take care, be safe, have a great day.